Hey there, Rebus here. Welcome to my review for the Blair Witch. In an effort to become more than a 30 view per video kind of guy, I recently committed to something I rarely do, and pre-purchased a game to experiment with the potential benefits of covering a game within a year of its launch. You know, like what normal people might actually search for and such. I was torn between Dark Pictures Anthology or the Blair Witch. Given my experience with Layers of Fear and the devs behind this new Blair Witch game, and my familiarity with the movies, I thought this might be the better choice. The story of the Blair Witch game expands on the lore and concepts from Book of Shadows, whilst being set before the events of the embarrassing for a 90s goth to watch sequel to the Blair Witch. The game is set in 1996, 2 years after the events of the first film, and fits in nicely between the two. As a rule, I kind of prefer my horror to rely on the power of spooky places, potentially corrupting those who attempt to civilize or tame it in some way, more than plots inherently tied to validating historic and reactionary fears about what the women are plotting behind the menfolk's backs. Ducking pools and burnings are a thing I'm glad we have moved on from. Without going too far into the plot for this game, it becomes fairly evident, fairly quickly, that your player character is an ex-military chap with some sort of troubling past and a neato dog whose name is Bullet. You begin the game joining a redemptive search for a small boy suspected to have gone missing in the woods, with only 3 dog biscuits between you. The horror for me began almost immediately, between the maximum 20 to 30 frames per second I could manage in the opening of the game, and the hideously scary computer fan-like noise when you pause the game. I feared my graphics card was close to death. Thankfully, a quick search of the Steam forums and reviews section revealed widespread reports of similar issues for others. To the devs' credit, a patch 3 hours after launch and a further performance patch the day after made me decide to proceed and just try the game despite the low FPS to see how it would improve. Thankfully, once you got into the woods, and with the addition of the patches, my sub 30 frames per second tech terror has subsided, or else it would have been totally game breaking. So, how's the game? Do I regret not grabbing Dark Pictures? No, not at all, but I could be happier. The environment is great. The way it messes with your sense of orientation was a joy. On more than one occasion I've gotten lost but keep finding myself returning to the same location I've just left. Maybe the path's shifted, or maybe it's just the difficulty of navigating fairly similar looking forests. It could perhaps be both factors working together sublimely. Either way, be it my idiocy or the deftness of the devs, good work. Walking through the woods at night in real life is disorientating. This game captures that sense well, whilst giving you a fluffy and inconsistent sat-nav in the form of Bullet, the occasional wonder dog. Bullet is a great addition to the game. He can be petted, of course, scolded, told to heel, to stay close, and a number of other dog-themed and sometimes situational commands. Whilst he is at your side, you feel safer. When he is absent, you worry. And when you are lost, he can be commanded to search for a scent, and will often lead you to a clue, or some random trash. Either or. You could perhaps compare Bullet to the least effective mini-map and objective marker yet seen in gaming, but for me he represents an ingeniously effective method of ridding the UI of visual clutter and improving immersion. Aside from Bullet, aka Buddy, the other main semi-distinctive tool at your disposal is the magic time-traveling camera, which well uses a trope from both this genre of game and the films this game is based upon. This amounts to being able to freeze the red tapes you get at any point where an obstacle would have otherwise blocked your progress, and have the reality on the camera be manifested in game reality. It's a neat gimmick that works well but feels somewhat underused. Unlike poor Bullet, who despite also serving as your compass and main means of transitioning from scene to scene. Seriously, the more I think about it, the dog should have been called Toto. Perhaps the most important and most buggy of all is Bullet's sporadic ability to face in the direction of one of the game's more persistent threats. Bereft of a name for them, I will coin them as speedy stick ghosts, or tree bastards, who must be defeated by shining your light upon them until they disappear in a flash of embarrassment at being shoehorned into an otherwise suspenseful game. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about the 2 monsters I've encountered. As said, you have the speedy stick ghost tree bastards, who move like the Flash after an espresso, and also PTSD leaf balls, who make you do hallucinations. Without a literal threat, the game would have been accused of being a walking simulator. However, I don't think either of these threats work quite well, and that their inclusion I think lowers the tone and sense of threat created by the ambient sounds and general atmosphere of the environment, be it stones being thrown around just out of view in the blackness beyond, or else the sense of aloneness and confusion created by the shifting map, the darkness, and the occasional moments of losing your dog. These work better for me than the in-your-face computer game monsterness. In games, I'm also somewhat more interested in how a game makes me as the player feel than specifically the protagonist. I think when a game focuses on triggering the player's universal fears rather than the fears of the character you are controlling, it makes for a more effective experience. Though, to be fair, I find the character's reactions logical to an extent extent in context with his own experiences so far, by striking an effective balance between the narrative experienced by the character and the experiences you will have as the player, my sense of alienation from the person I'm playing is minimal, with a few massive exceptions. At its core, the player character's quest for redemption and his anger and guilt are, I suppose, universal enough feelings that it is largely relatable, if not every player's own personal journey. I would probably prefer a blander protagonist with a less specific history, but what they've decided to do, they've done well enough. Just don't launch the game expecting a Gordon Freeman Neo-esque blank slate to project upon, and you should be fine. Expect a more cinematic narrative rather than the silent protagonist gamey approach, and you won't be disappointed. I have been mostly impressed by the atmospheric visuals and sounds, the general feel of the woods, and the fact the game slightly improves the Book of Shadows movie, which is no mean feat. The least praiseworthy part of the game for me is the entire end portion. I never knew if the witch would eventually end up killing us, as she is prone to do with house visitors, but by the end of the excessive House of Horrors end section, I was fully prepared to look the Blair Witch in the eyes and beg for death. The multiple endings, though present, represent varying degrees of nonsense as far as I'm concerned, but in a way that makes it more of a genuine horror game. I mean, how many horror films maintain a sense of moderation? Many are the horror films that manage to deflate their own tension by resorting to excess in the last 15 minutes. The Blair Witch Game sadly chose to resort to the Spinal Tap school of logic, which for me let the previous, more nuanced and more measured tone down entirely. I'd say I enjoyed 85 to 95% of the game. So if you're the sort of person who rarely finishes the games you play, this could well be your horror game of the year. If you buy this game and regret it, when you ask for a refund, just say the Blair Witch made you buy it. Gabe's assured me that will work.